أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إن الذين قالوا ربنا الله ثم استقاموا تتنزل عليهم الملائكة ألا تخافوا ولا تحزنوا وأبشروا بالجنة التي كنتم توعدون. نحن أولياؤكم في الحياة الدنيا وفي الآخرة ولكم فيها ما تشتهي أنفسكم ولكم فيها ما تدعون نزلا من غفور رحيم. ومن أحسن قولا ممن دعا إلى الله وعمل صالحا وقال إنني من المسلمين. ولا تستوي الحسنة ولا السيئة ادفع بالتي هي أحسن فإذا الذي بينك وبينه عداوة كأنه ولي حميم. وما يلقاها إلا الذين صبروا وما يلقاها إلا ذو حظ عظيم. وإما ينزغنك من الشيطان نزغ فاستعذ بالله إنه هو السميع العليم. صدق الله العظيم. And now the translation. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. As for those who say, our Lord is God, and take the straight path towards Him, the angels come down to them and say, have no fear or grief, but rejoice in the good news of paradise, which you have been promised. We are your allies in this world, and in the world to come, where you will have everything you desire and ask for, as a welcoming gift from the most forgiving, most merciful one. Who speaks better than someone who calls people to God, does what is right, and says, I am one of those devoted to God? Good and evil cannot be equal. The prophet says, repel evil with what is better, and your enemy will become as close as an old and valued friend. But only those who are steadfast in patience, only those who are blessed with great righteousness will attain to such goodness. If a prompting from Satan should stir you, seek refuge with God. He is the all-hearing and the all-knowing. Sadaqallahu al-Azim.
Thank you everyone for coming, and taking the time out to come here. I would just like the speakers to introduce themselves, but just about Rebecca Brown really quickly. Ms. Rebecca, she got her degree in music from UF, and she graduated in a degree of divinity at Graduate Theological Union. It's at Berkeley. It's a pretty famous school. She's the founder and director of Streetlight. It's a program where it's a peer support group for teenagers who have chronic or terminally ill things. And the program, it's at Shands, and now it's like spreading nationwide. And so she gave a TEDx talk last year, so many of you guys probably heard of her. Mohammad Mendez. He was born in the United States and spent some of his youth in Nigeria. At the age of 17, he embraced Islam after a life-changing journey to Israel. And while in college pursuing a BA in Arabic, he began studying the different sciences of Islam. He's a director of Medina Institute, and he's pretty well known in the American Muslim community today. So if both of you guys could just say a few words about yourself.
Okay.
Ladies first.
Okay. Most people call me Miss Rebecca. I have, I guess, a somewhat odd profession. which to many seems depressing, or that it would be, because we're working with adolescents and young adults who are either suffering with a chronic illness, or they know they're living with a shortened life, or they have cancer knowing that they could relapse. I spent much of my life working as a youth minister with young people and helping them try to make meaning of their life. And then after I was in Berkeley, I felt like the most challenging situation would be to help someone who knew they were living a shortened life to find some meaning in their life, some spiritual meaning. I could imagine that they might be mad at God and life, that they are dying young. And I kind of wanted to put myself in that situation to just see what it would feel like to me and how I could help them navigate that. So I suggested this program back in actually 2004 to Shands, and the right people were there at the time, which is, as you can imagine, not a program everybody would say we need to do. But a lot of the doctors felt like the adolescents were difficult to work with, were very depressed. And doctors would say they don't even talk, they just grunt, you know. So they were all for it. And so it was accepted, and I moved back here, and I had lived here and went out to Berkeley for 3 years and then came back. I will say, I would not try to say that I know Islam like I would like to know it, but I was at a graduate theological union where Judaism is taught by a rabbi and Islam by an imam, and I took Tibetan Buddhism through a Tibetan monk. I didn't want to go to a seminary where we had Christian people telling us what other people think. So that was a unique place to go, and I loved it. Plus, California and Berkeley is a pretty wonderful place to come from too. So I think that gives you an introduction of what I do, and I will be sharing with you a little bit about how I spiritually deal with death and dying on a regular basis, and I think that's probably all for now.
Assalamu alaikum. Peace be with you. My name is Mohammad Mendez. Most people call me Mohammed, except my mother. She calls me Ade, which is the name I was born with. I think the best metaphor I would use for what I do in my life would be a bridge. My father was an immigrant from Nigeria to the United States. My mother is an African American, so I've kind of lived in both worlds as an immigrant and a son of the soil. When I embraced Islam, I became a bridge between Muslims and people of other faiths. I'm very active in the inner city, in the inner city community, as well as in the suburbs. So, I'm active with youth as well as with elders and people in their middle ages, as I'm fast approaching. So, as Zulkarnain said, I got my BA in Arabic, and after that I went to the Middle East and to West Africa to study the classical Islamic sciences. And upon my return, I continued my studies, and I got married, and I have 5 very energetic children right now. And I spend most of my time working at Medina Institute, which is a mosque/educational institute devoted to education, compassion, and spiritual illumination. We ground ourselves in the Islamic tradition, but do not limit ourselves to it. We celebrate diversity, we celebrate differences of opinion. We do our best not to be dogmatic about belief or practice or spirituality. I'm very active in the permaculture environmental movement and looking for ways that we can better design our lives and better fulfill our needs of food, clothing, shelter, medicine, in a way that's not damaging to the environment or damaging to ourselves or the people that we love who are around us. And I'm still continuing my studies, and I think the greatest revelation that I've received in the past 4 or 5 years is that everything you need to heal, everything you need to awaken, everything you need to connect to the Creator is already within you. You're kind of born with this software. You're born with this, is it hardware? You're born with the hardware, right? You're born with this hardware, and all you need is an operating system to access it so that you function in the universe as you were created to. So that's pretty much what I'd like to share. But I hope to share more about my life, and I'd like to hear more about your own lives, because we each have stories that have great meaning. And life is all about discovering the meaning in your own story.
Jazakallah. Instead of going to a drawn-out introduction on the purpose of the event, I think the name of the event, Tuning Out the Static, says a lot. We're here, it's a beautiful property, it's about 5-6 acres. You can pretty much, we'll have plenty of breaks, so people like myself have short attention span. You will have there's a trail, it's like a red mulchy trail. So it's like swimming pools to the left. There's bathrooms in the back. There are snacks. There's snacks right there. We'll have chai breaks in between. We'll have a dinner. And dinner will be here. You can go out anywhere else to have dinner. Did I miss anything? No. I'm good? Okay. So inshallah, I just hope that we all open ourselves. The 2 speakers are pretty amazing. And so if Rebecca could just start.
Okay, I'm just going to grab a little bit more water.
Can I just say one thing?
Yeah.
If you have like a T-Mobile service like me, you probably don't have any bars. But this is a recommendation to get the most out of this retreat. I highly suggest you do what I just did, which is power off your phones, if you haven't done so already.
Okay. Assalamu alaikum. I want to thank Jeffrey, who is not here, and Solkar for this invitation, and for any others of you that have worked so hard to make this happen. I'm really honored to be asked to do this, to speak, to share my thoughts with you. Early on, as the director of Streetlight, I took into this program a young Muslim UF student named Omar Shakil. He was maybe a little shy at the age of 19. He is not at all now. He turned 26 just this past Thursday and is going into his pediatric residency. Does anyone know Omar here?
It sounds familiar.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. And I do not exaggerate when I say that he changed my life, and perhaps I his. I'm Christian and Omar is Muslim. But through the course of our many spiritual discussions, we realized to our surprise that we were brothers and sisters in our faith and in our deep love of God. I love Omar, and it was my rich experience with him that led me to seek out other Muslim students for Streetlight. Jeffrey and Tassif and now many others. And I think that sounds strange sometimes when I'm interviewing somebody and I say, "Oh, you're Muslim. Good." You probably don't hear that a lot, unfortunately. And it was my experience with Omar that, the Prophet, peace be upon him, teaches you to submit and surrender, and it is, I believe, what makes you such powerful servants for God in this world. This commitment to submit and to serve. I've certainly seen it in our Streetlight Muslim members. So just a little bit about my journey and where I'm going to come from in talking with you is, in 1996, let's see, were any of you guys born then? I guess, probably. Okay. I left the suburbs of Gainesville to move out to the country. I bought 8.6 acres. People thought I was crazy. And I live in a little town called High Springs. And I will say very frankly, I did that because I could not clearly hear the voice of God from my perfect house and front lawn and neatly paved driveway. I could not hear it from my church. I could not hear it from my TV. I could not even hear God as I knelt by my bed to pray. Perhaps I'm wired a little differently. I grew up just outside New York City, and when I was 12 years old, when I experienced for the first time the wild beauty of nature at a summer camp in the Catskill Mountains. I fell deeply in love there with nature. At age 15, I read Walden by Henry David Thoreau. And I can remember sitting in this classroom. It was just a horrible situation. In those days, they had something that they called open space teaching, where you had these pods, and it was not a very good format for learning. And I don't even remember the teacher. My teacher really was Thoreau. I distinctly remember sitting there when a light went on in my brain and a warmth came over my heart as my love for God and nature became one love. To borrow from a song, I was a young girl on a kind of telephone line through time, and the voice at the other end, Thoreau, came like a long-lost friend. Walden was a letter to my soul. I do not have time to tell you the whole story of my life, but I do wish to share with you some things I've learned from this relationship with God through nature, and how it helps me in the work I do with death and dying in Streetlight. We partner with young people who are living with chronic pain or facing an early death, or they're actively dying. I call my property that I moved to out in High Springs, I call it Quiet Place. And there is a wood burn sign that hangs from a post at the entrance as you come in, and it says, Quiet Place. And it's named after a song I heard when I was 12 years old. Listen to these words. There is a quiet place, far from the rapid pace, where God can soothe my troubled mind. Sheltered by tree and flower, there in my quiet hour, with Him, my cares are left behind. Whether a garden small or on a mountain tall, new strength and courage there I find. Then from this quiet place, I go prepared to face a new day with love for all mankind. I found my quiet place some 20 years ago now, and it is mostly wild. It is not beautiful like this. It's wild. Only a small portion of the property is tamed. There's a little oasis of grass around a yellow house and front porch that I had built. But about 5 years ago, I decided to make a nature trail, to cut a trail through the wilder parts of the 8 acres. A path for prayer. Because I realized I was only experiencing this little oasis and I was looking out on the wildness. I wanted to walk through the wildness. So I cut a trail through pines and oaks and blackberry bushes, and it took 5 months to make, and it has become a wonderland of truth and inspiration in my life. And I don't believe I could do the work that I do with the young people I do, and to deal with the untimely deaths I do, if I did not walk this trail every morning. It is the Word of God to me each day. That is when my eyes and ears are open. I mentioned the 20th century anthropologist Jeffrey Gore, who wrote an article called The Pornography of Death. And it was his hypothesis that when some natural aspect of human experience, like sex or death, is treated as inherently abhorrent, pushed into a closet, not discussed openly, it will of necessity pop out in a pornographic or horrific manner elsewhere in that society. And think about that with death. That as natural death becomes more closeted, we don't talk about it. Violent death will, in direct proportion, play an ever-growing part in the fantasies offered to mass audiences. And don't we see that on TV, in our movies, on our 24-hour cable news, even in our video games? And I think it gives us the illusion that, oh, actually, we're talking a lot about death. We're dealing with death. Because after all, I sit on my couch and I shoot people in my video game, and I watch it in my movies, or I watch NCIS and I see them dissect bodies, and I am completely comfortable and at ease with death. I think it's the exact opposite. We are not. It is not integrated in our life, and so we see it in these kind of odd orientations to death. Now, I'm not suggesting, especially brothers, that you throw away your Xbox, or even that you start talking about death regularly as a lunchtime topic on campus, but I have found such richness in my life from being up close and personal with death. And most people would find my work uncomfortable because the deaths that I am living through, you might call unfair. It's the deaths of teenagers and children, untimely deaths. I want to share with you some of the perspective I've gained from living a life embedded in nature and what it has taught me about life and living and death and dying. So for what it's worth, these are just a few excerpts from my almanac. And each of them is sort of just a nugget to think about. And I'd encourage you to just look out the window and just let your mind go there. So these are some excerpts. The Irish call it thin places, where heaven and earth come closer. My trail is a thin place, where most of my thoughts are tuned to a spiritual frequency. Quiet place is like a teenager I am not tending to. Everything is growing and rapidly. I do not ask color or beauty from it. I ask for its honest expression of life and death. Yesterday, Jeffrey and Tassif brought me a new walking stick from their trip to the mountains. It is so perfect, I do not want to use it. Life is so beautiful, sometimes I don't want to risk it. I came across a small spider just finishing his web. It was absolutely magnificent. It deserved a standing ovation. This little web glimmered in the sun like a small vinyl 45 record. I always duck under a web with my spider stick, and I do have a spider stick. It's a stick that has a few prongs at the end. When I'm walking on my trail, I lift the spider web to go under. Because who am I to tear it apart? I have given far less energy to walk my path than this spider who has taken hours of perfect precision to create it in the early morning light. And there's this spider recently that has positioned himself directly across my path now for 3 weeks. But you know, he seems to never catch anything in his web because it's always intact. So I wonder, is he really happy in his palatial home? I have taken to calling him Captain, and I bid him good morning as I pass by. I realize I do not know the scientific names of my trees, or of any of the spiders, or plant life on my property. And I do not want to know their names. Once I label them, they will disappear into a name. Labels imply understanding, ownership, and objectification. I prefer observation, humility, and relationship. Patients are not cancer patients. They are people first. I saw a woodpecker and noticed he was pecking a live tree, but that the branch he had chosen was in fact dead, as part of a live tree. I fear the woodpeckers in my life. Let me be alive with love and green with kindness, so there will be no bugs to peck for. Today I paused before a group of trees. They possibly germinated at the same time, but they are not imitating or consulting each other as to how to grow. You know, there are no self-help books for trees. Animals and birds do get some tutelage from the parents, but they seem to know how to be. Humans are much more helpless, so we get a lot of instruction from parents, school, society, and television. And some of it is harmful. Some of it can mess with the personal, genetic, spiritual orders of our soul. Thoreau asked us to listen to our inner drummer and step to the music that we hear, however measured or far away. It is spring, but not every tree is sprouting buds. Trees grow next to each other with their own private instructions. They listen to their own inner wisdom about their environment. Nature is full of individuals with private and personal identities. The nerve of the evergreens to wear their green leaves right beside the trees that are losing theirs. It doesn't make them better, does it? Perhaps some people could be called evergreen because of the constancy and sameness of their life. I think I am by nature deciduous because I am always remaking myself. Today, as I walked the woods, I noticed how few trees are perfectly straight. How ugly that would be if they were all straight. Trees lean and bend and accommodate. They seek out light or a path to the light. So when I wonder, how will I know the way? God answers me the same way He answers all of life. Follow the light. Our human communities need fences. Nature obviously hates them. If the rusted demolished fence on the east side of my property tells me anything, nature always disrespects a fence. It grows around it or even through it. The huge oaks on the path have curiously incorporated the rusty fence right into their trunk. What an amazing sight. A rusted metal fence embedded in the girth of a tree. And yet I look up and 40 feet above me, she is green and thriving. She got the better of the fence and made her handicap a feature. I want to be that oak. So much that is dead on my trail is useful. Nature has no tolerance for waste. The dead tree rots and provides nutrients for the soil, which gives rise to a new generation of trees, shrubs, insects, or moss. Every tall pine tree has lower limbs that tell its story. The broken limbs are not indicators of failure, but of growth. A tree does not die because a limb was dropped. Life will stretch as high as it can go. The tallest trees have broken limbs. Hear that, the tallest trees have broken limbs. Early branches must be shed to give resource for the new. As I observe it, everything in Quiet Place goes through change. Change frightens me, but sameness is a sure sign of death. I wonder, does fall happen like clockwork overnight? Does a memo go out, and who sends it and when? I guess I too should expect gray hair, wrinkles, joint pain, and aging. Summer is over, and it is okay. I've noticed recently that some trees are completely dead, yet standing. This almost seems deceitful. The tree stands because no stress has caused it to fall, no wind, no storm, but it is indeed dead. Does this happen with human beings? I wonder. I think so, if by that we mean that there is no new growth, no curiosity, no reaching for light. Some people do seem that way, alive but dead inside. Sometimes it's hard to tell the living from the dead. Nature is always poised and waiting for the weather, be it rain or drought, for attack, be it axe, clipper, or bugs. Nature does not know the future. It accepts the ebb and flow of the seasons. I started thinking about why I believe in God. If I saw a perfectly spun web, but never its maker, I guess I could say it just happened. Or like the deists, I could say that its maker built it and then left. But if we see the maker in the center of the web, how do we deny he made it? When I see love, am I seeing the maker or the web? Wild is real. We can and we do stifle the wild and prefer to create something which is not real. This gives us the illusion of control over life and over death. So what's the proof that we are truly delusional? We cry, unfair, unfair, when the wild touches our life through death or disease. Death is sad, but it is not unfair. Wilderness, survival, competition, disease, and growth is real. I'll walk by 2 young trees, one completely consumed by caterpillars and disease, and the other just like it, untouched. That is what I see on my nature trail, and that is what I see in the hospital. Winter is a reminder to us all that life is defoliating. For someone, somewhere, if not for us. Everything on my trail is either in the process of budding, opening a blossom, closing a blossom, drooping, dying, or dead. Society treats death as an affront, an injustice, as if the universe itself should scream in outrage. But curiously, it does not scream. And the stars do not shake with shame. The earth is a tomb for every great prophet, poet, and artist who has ever lived. Roses bloom and get tired and spent and lose their beauty. It is the way of life. And we humans get time to ponder this with every passing season. And yet we still live unprepared for death's advances. How still the wind today. Hardly a leaf moves. But the morning weather is not a predictor of the day. Pregnant, poised, waiting. Will there be rain? Will there be sun? Like nature, I too must wait and learn to just be and let the day unfold. The trees are not in charge of making rain or summoning the sun. Even the tree that is ravaged by caterpillars can only wait till they are done. Plant life and trees do not get to stage a protest. The pines shed their needles after turning orange. Perhaps their task is done, but it is not. They become mulch for another tree. But why not so with us?
We sweep up our orange needles and cart them off to nursing homes. Our elders do not get to nurture the young. In nature, some die because it is their time, and some die from disease, some from trauma or murder, and some from obstacles which cannot be overcome. But we are all of us inclined to death. Thoreau said, we need the tonic of wildness. Perhaps that's why I was never crazy about manicured gardens. They just are not true. Life is not perfectly snipped and pruned of its weeds. I see death lying right beside the living, feeding the living, and keeping company with the living, a quiet place. Death nourishes life. Nature does not hide death. So why do we? This morning I encountered a shimmering web surrounding its lifeless weaver. The spider had died from the cold, but was still hanging from the center of her web. And I stopped to think about her, spinning this web hours before I rose, in hopes of catching the day's food, and then bravely taking her center post in the chilly air. This morning, however, it was just too cold. How could she know? Maybe she did know. Today was the day. But she is a spider, and spinning a web is what she does. Today she died in her web, and that is an honorable way to go, to die doing what you like to do, usually do, and want to do. Death is natural and wild. We try to control it, and it escapes our abduction. We think we are doing good, and we destroy the good it can be, because life can be rude, conflicted, tortured, and mean, and it does not readily welcome tubes and needles and beeping machines at its end. Death wants the warmth of human company. As I watch the race for life in the wild, the stronger, faster, and taller survive. Others get left behind if we do not give them a little help. The human being has the privilege or audacity to help, cultivate, and protect. Should I scorn the manicured garden? Chemicals kill the weeds with a toxin, yet some come back and still overtake the garden. There's a point when the soil is more saturated with toxins than with nutrients. I see this imbalance in the hospital. When we say that death is unfair, is it because we have begun to believe in our own control? Have we become like the Wizard of Oz and believe ourselves to be all-powerful? Science has tried hard to stave off death and disease. But once we began to approach evening up the sides with our medical advances, God became the enemy, the taker of life, so they say. I'm not sure that anybody saw death that way 100 years ago. Tim died last night. So my kids in the hospital do nothing so well as rehearse. And when they leave me, it is with a blaze of autumnal color, such colors that I do not see in an aging evergreen. Of the fall, my reflection is this. We are destined to lose, destined for seasonal losses. Nature gives us many rehearsals of this four-act play, in case we forget. To be alive is to experience loss. We scuff through the leaves, or we rake them, or curse them, but we get a yearly reminder everything ages and falls. Do it with grace and acceptance. We live like we think death cannot find us. We protect ourselves with fig leaves, Botox, and life insurance. But it still knows our location. Why not come out from hiding and know death as a friend? Today the trees spoke to me. It was a gray and uncertain sky. I walked toward the fire pit, and a sonorous chorus of moving leaves surrounded me. So lovely, the trees swaying back and forth like a gospel choir. And I was thinking about my friend Martin, who was newly diagnosed with cancer. The trees were singing this to me. They were saying, "This is life, Rebecca. We welcome you to join us. Bend with us in the wind. The wind does blow. The question is, can you make music of it? We do." I want to close by reading a piece of poetry from Rabia of Basra, who is said to be one of the most popular and influential female Islamic saints, and a central figure in the Sufi tradition. She was born nearly 500 years before Rumi, and although it's rarely said, she perhaps more than any other poet influenced his writing. Hear her words. We're talking about the year 750. Ironic, but one of the most intimate acts of our body is death. So beautiful appeared my death, knowing who then I would kiss. I died 1,000 times before I died. Die before you die, said the Prophet Muhammad. Have wings that feared ever touched the sun? I was born when all I once feared I could love. Someone said, once you learn how to die, you learn how to live. I share this because it's absolutely integral to me to be able to look in the eyes of a young person and know they're living a much shorter life or a much more unfair situation. So I look on my trail and I say, is death unfair? It is not. It is everywhere. It is part of life. And I think some of the most unnatural things we do are because we do not integrate it into part of life. I love what Rabia says because she's saying, I think she's saying, that she imagines her death and who she will kiss on the other side of her death. Her beloved, her God. And she imagines dying 1,000 times because death brings her closer to her beloved. I think that's what she means. And she says she's reborn when everything she once feared, she could love. Now, I don't think any of you or any of us intentionally are sitting there thinking, I'm afraid of death. Maybe you are. But I think our society puts it away, so far away, that there's a natural fear of it. There's a fear of running out of time to make our mark, running out of time to make money, have a family, do what we want to do. Every one of the kids I meet in the hospital will not have that time, will not have that time. They will not go to school, they will not marry. They will not fall in love. And think about how you worry about when will that happen for you, huh? Surely you have wondered and you've thought, when? Will it happen soon enough? What will I be? What will I become? These are things that are not going to happen for them. And when I am close to them and I love them and I feel with them, they give me perspective to my life because I realize they are having to make their peace with life with so much more uncertainty than I have, than you have. And I think it's why so many young people find Streetlight a rich experience. How do you go home after seeing somebody who's lost their leg and complain about a bad hair day? You just don't. Every loss is a rehearsal for death. If so, everything that we lose, that friend, that relationship, that grade we wanted to get, that opportunity, as we learn to embrace changes in death, it helps us, changes in life, it helps us prepare for an ultimate loss, but also, as Rabia says, to look forward to this union with the beloved. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
أجمعين. الحمد لله الذي أنعم علينا بنعمة الإيمان والإسلام وهدانا لسنة رسول الله عليه من الله تعالى أفضل الصلاة والسلام. We begin seeking the blessings and the light and the love, the grace of the name of Allah, God, the creator of all that is, and the one who is the all-merciful, the loving Savior. And we ask that He send His best of blessings and most perfect of peace on our beloved guide, leader, Muhammad, along with his family and his companions and all of the prophets and all the messengers before him, from Adam to Noah to Abraham to Moses, Jesus Christ, the Son of Mary, and those between them and those who follow them. We ask that Allah bless those who follow them forever and ever. Listening to Miss Rebecca was very inspiring, and I thank the organizers and I thank the volunteers for bringing this event, for organizing this event and orienting it the way you have. There's a famous book, if you don't have it, you should get it. It's called Ihya Ulumuddin, the revival or the rejuvenation of the sciences of life, the sciences of the way, by Imam al-Ghazali. Anyone heard of Imam al-Ghazali before? Yeah, he was Al-Ghazal, they call him in Renaissance Europe during the Enlightenment period. And he has this magnum opus that he wrote, begins with the book of knowledge, the chapter on knowledge, and it ends with the chapter on the remembrance of death. And there are 40 chapters, and each chapter leads to the next. And it ends with the remembrance of death, because remembering death, reflecting on death, which is the last chapter, the 40th book, leads to the greatest knowledge, which is the first book in his magnum opus. And in that chapter, there's this beautiful story in which Prophet Muhammad, Allah bless him and grant him peace, he gives advice to his most beloved wife, our mother, Aisha, after Khadija. God be pleased with her as well. And he tells her, choose your friends based on how frequently they reflect on death. And so when Miss Rebecca was speaking, I was thinking about that, and I thought to myself, Miss Rebecca would have to be one of our best friends. Because she reflects on death every day. And so thank you again. Yeah, thank you again. Thank you again. I wanted to share some things that I've come across on the lives of man, on what it means to be a human being. And what I find in my own life and in my work is that many of us, many people don't truly know who they are. And from the temples of ancient Egypt to the circles of Socrates and and beyond, to the lodges of Sufis and to the gatherings of the Buddha, every major religion, every major spiritual tradition, there's an axiom that's pretty universal, that knowledge of yourself, whoever knows themselves, whoever knows their soul, will know their Creator. And there's a study done by a scientist, actually his name escapes me, but Dennis Kimbrough mentions him in his book. And he did a survey of 3,000 people. 94% of them didn't know why they existed. 94% of them had no idea about the purpose of their lives. And this is a cause for great sadness, that you've been blessed, that we've been blessed with so much potential. Physical potential, mental, emotional, spiritual potential, and we go through life waiting, as Miss Rebecca was saying, waiting. We're waiting for love, or waiting for the big break, or waiting for some opportunity, and not living a life full of purpose and intention. So I wanted to share something with you on the lives of man. And when we say man here, we don't mean men, right? We mean man in a generic sense encompassing humanity. That Imam Abdullah al-Haddad, who was a great scholar who lived in Yemen in the 18th century. He lived in southern Yemen. He was born blind, but from the time he was a young boy, he was renowned for his intellectual abilities, for his spiritual abilities, and he has many, 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 many books written in very simple but profound language. And a number of them have been translated into English. And one of them is called The Lives of Man, where he speaks about what it means to be a human. And so I just wanted to share those with you so that we can focus on what matters most, where we're coming from, where we are, and where we're going. And these lives he categorizes into 5 phases. And so we'll go over them in general, and then we'll look at each of them specifically. The first phase of life is preconception. That's where life begins. Before you are that fertilized egg in your mother's womb. That's the first phase. The second phase of life is what's called the life of the dunya, the life of the lowest world, the lowest dimension, because that's what dunya means. Dunya doesn't mean money, right? You hear people say, I don't want to live my life for dunya, right? Dunya doesn't mean money. Dunya means what's physical, what's nearest to our senses. The word dunya means that which is close. And the word dunya means the world that is most dense and most ephemeral, most fleeting at the same time. It sounds paradoxical, but it's actually not, when you understand that ultimately we're spiritual beings, not physical beings. The third phase is the phase he calls the barzakh, which is this transition from this worldly life, this life and this dimension, to the intermediate realm, the barzakh, the world that begins at death. This is the third realm. And this world, this life that we're in, whether or not your life is for 5 seconds, or for 5 years, or 50 years, this life really is a preparation for that life. And Prophet Muhammad, God bless him and grant him peace, said, you die in accordance with how you lived. And you will be resurrected in accordance with how you die. So there's a chain. Everything you're doing now in this life affects how you end. And the way you end your life affects how you're born into the next life. Because really, the human being, we just go through a series of births. We're born from a spiritual realm into this realm, which is spiritual and physical. Spiritual and physical. And then we're born from this realm into the intermediate realm between this life and the resurrection on Judgment Day, which is the fourth phase, the resurrection. We call it Yom Al-Qiyamah, Yom Ad-Din. Every time we pray, we say Maliki Yom Ad-Din. That period is the fourth phase of life. And this is where human beings are ultimately shown divine mercy and divine justice. And then lastly, Imam al-Haddad discusses the final phase of our lives, which is eternity. Eternity in proximity to God, the Creator, in paradise, in Jannah, and all of the bliss and rewards that accompany that, or eternity in hell, in remoteness from God, distance from God, and the torments that go with that. The torments that are the manifestation of how you lived your life. And the bliss that we experience in paradise is the manifestation of how we lived our life. So, in effect, we build our own heavens now. And we build our own hells now. There's no separation. If the higher you go, there's actually no separation between the 5 phases. They're all one. It's like climbing a mountain. The higher you go up a mountain, the more you can see of the landscape and the horizon. When you're at the base, you see the trees and you see the different bushes and the different animals and on one side of the mountain, but you're veiled from seeing the other side of the mountain. Right? But the higher you go, the more you can see. Right? And this is an excellent metaphor for eternity. Because when you speak about eternity, there is no past, there is no present. It's just one moment that is eternally present with you. And when you read the Quran, when you read the Bible, when you read the Bhagavad Gita and other scriptures, when God speaks, He speaks about the past, present, and future all at the same time. All at the same time. Because from His perspective, there is no past. It's all present. And connecting with God is all about being in the present. It's all about being in the present and not being caught up in the worries of our past or having anxiety about a future that has not yet been realized. So these lives help us understanding these lives and what happens in each one helps us prioritize what's most important. And so I want to touch on each of them briefly. So our first life is our life as a spirit, and what's called in Arabic alam al-arwah, the dimension of spirits. And This is alluded to in the Quran when Allah says, on the day when we brought forth the spirits to bear witness, and God said to them, am I not your divine nurturer? A word that's often translated as Lord, Rabb, right? Most of the times when you see the word Rabb, people translate it as Lord, but actually Rabb means a being that develops and nurtures things from one level of development to a higher level of development until it reaches perfection. And this is God's relationship with everything in the cosmos. That our life and our death, our joys and our sorrows, our hardships and our ease, are all a part of one process of bringing us to our greatest potential. Health, sickness, wealth, poverty are all about developing us to perfection. And in this realm of the spirits, God says in the Quran that we all responded, Bala, indeed. You are our nurturer. You are our teacher. You are our cultivator. And God says, we remind you of this so that on the day of judgment, you will not say you forgot. So in that is implicit that there's a knowledge that we all have that's within us. You're born with it. And this life, however long you have, is an opportunity to remember that moment, to remember that realm. And people, not just Muslims, but people who take their spiritual growth seriously, you'll find that many of them have an opportunity to remember that time. The time when they were pure spirit, pure light, pure consciousness. Where they were in the presence of God, subsisting in the presence of God, no cares, no worries. It's a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful experience. And then at a certain point in time, when God wills, He chooses a man and a woman who will be your mother and father, right? For better or for worse. He chooses a community that will be your community. He chooses a land, a country that will be your country, your land. Based on whatever work it is that you're here to do. And your work, it might be to bring solace and comfort and inspiration to young people who are facing death. Your work might be to build bridges and buildings and materialize architecture that will bring shelter to people and facilitate business and family and community. Your work might be to dance or to sing, or to write poetry that connects people to the deepest depths of who they are. But whatever it is your spirit, God, whatever it is Allah created your spirit to do, He puts you in the family, He puts you in the place that will give you the experiences, the resources to develop that gift. So it's not by chance at all. God says in the Quran, وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسَ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ. I only created sprites and human beings that they adore me, that they worship me, that they serve me. So we're sent here to serve. And what brings meaning to your life, whether many of you are in college, in the university, what brings meaning to your life, whether you're in the humanities, or you're in the arts, or you're in the sciences, whatever department you're in, whatever field of study attracts you, or if you're not in the university, if you're in a particular vocation, what gives our lives meaning is discovering our particular service. We're all like letters of the alphabet. We all can't be A's. If everyone's an A, you can't spell many words. All right. If we're all doctors, all right, and I know some of our parents want all of us to be doctors, all right? Doctors or lawyers, or what's the other one? Engineers, right? If there's only A's, B's, or C's, there's not much beauty that can come out of that. There's not much depth that can come out of it. Shakespeare could not write Shakespeare with just A's, B's, and C's. Rumi could not have wrote the Methnawi with just Aleph, Ba, and Ta. Right? So we need all of us. And each one and every one of us has to discover after we're born into this realm, into this dunya, into this lower dimension. We come from a very high place, a very celestial place. We have to discover your highest self. So that's what we're here for in this dunya. We're born into this world, and there's stages. There's a stage of absorption. You know, Montessori, if you've heard of Dr. Maria Montessori, she's one of the most eloquent writers about the stages of growth of the young human being. There's a stage of absorption, right, where you're absorbing, you know, from 0 to 6. It's a very vulnerable stage. It's a stage of great impression, where you're very impressionable, but it's also a stage where you're doing great work. This age is from 0 to 6, from infancy to 6, 7 years old is a time when the human being is constructing a self. Your sense of who you are. If you have little brothers or sisters or cousins, just watch them sometimes. Even when they're playing, they are working. Even when they're playing, they're working. They are building a soul. This spirit that came from the celestial and this body that comes from the terrestrial, they get to know each other. And you see babies, right? They kind of move and they stretch and they smile and no one knows why, right? It's the spirit getting used to the body. And over months, over years, that spirit gets comfortable in the body. And along with that, it's getting used to its environment and getting used to the people that are around it, and then to the backyard and the front yard and the uncles and the aunties and the cousins. And in all of these relationships, there's a constant learning. And there are certain things that are learned from infancy to 6 years old. There are certain things that are learned from the age of 6 to the age of 12 and 13. And there's certain things that are learned from 13 to 17 and then beyond. But these years of youth, which in the Islamic tradition, youth goes up to how old?
35.
39, right? 39. I'm still a youth. So I'm trying to hold on as long as I can. All right, it goes up to 39, and some say 35, some scholars say 35, right? But generally 40 is seen as the age of true maturity in adulthood. Like that is the age of strength, not just physical strength, but mental and physical strength. If you've been prepared, if you've been preparing the 39 years before that, at that age, the age of 40, you will be, you're prepared to receive from God through the creation around you what it is that's needed for you to fulfill your mission. Now, some people reach that stage before 40. Right? As Miss Rebecca was saying, there's some people who will never reach the age of 40. Right? But that doesn't stop them from realizing their purpose. Right? Because in the spiritual world, 1 + 1 doesn't always equal 2. 1 + 1 may equal 3 or 4, because there's the work you do, and then there's God's grace. There's the grace of Allah, which adds another element. So using this time, while you're on this plane, while you're on the earth, to know God, to know yourself, and to serve humanity with your gift is the most important thing that we could be doing. And this is what we are ultimately held accountable for. How do we use our gift? And this is why when we die and we go on to Judgment Day, we're asked, right? We're asked, how did you use your life? How did you use your wealth? How did you make your wealth? How did you use your youth? How did you use your knowledge? All of these things that make up who we are puzzles. They're pieces of a puzzle that all come together ultimately in the hereafter. So this opportunity, a lot of times people ask, well, why are we here? Why are we here? What's the meaning of life? If God knows everything, if God knows whether or not we're going to end up in heaven or hell, why are we going through this? What's the point? Has anyone ever thought that before? Anyone ever asked that? Yeah. Why are we here? You're here to realize your full potential. You are here to be a conduit, to be a means for the grace of God flowing into the lives of others. And you can do that whether you're a man or a woman, whether you are physically strong or physically weak, whether you have an IQ of 500 or an IQ of 50, you can be a conduit for God's grace and light and love for all of those who are around you. So this dunya is full of distractions. There's entertainment, and we live in a culture. I'm not just talking about the United States. This is a global phenomenon now. And we live in a society where after working and making sure the marketplace, making sure that the financial system is robust, making sure that people are spending, right? After September 11th, what did President Bush say? Go shop, right? He made sure people didn't stop shopping. After making sure the marketplace is fine, the most important thing we have to do is entertain ourselves. And I'm submitting to you that if you get deeper into who you are, if you get a more tangible connection with nature, and I'm so happy that Miss Rebecca emphasized wild nature, because going to a park, right, that's neatly manicured, and it's not nature. It's natural, but it's not nature. There's something. It's like a song. There's certain songs when you hear them sung, or when you hear the strings of the instrument plucked. There's something inside you that's also plucked. There's strings inside you that are strung. It's the same thing when you go. You feel the same experience happens when you go outside and you walk under trees and on grass. And when we do our meditation exercise later, if the grass is not wet, we'll get a chance to feel what it means, what it's like to walk on the grass without shoes. And then after this life, we're born into the hereafter. We're born into the barzakh. And the Quran has a lot of detailed information with what happens at death and what happens after death. Really, for no one who reads the Quran, death should not be a surprise. And what happens after death. It doesn't mean that there's certain unknowns that still exist. There are. Right? It doesn't mean that there is an unfamiliarity with that world. That will still be there. But a general landscape of what's going on when you die, what happens when you die, and how you want to be when you die should not be something that you're distant from. The most important thing when you read the Quran, The most important thing is not when you die. That's not the most important thing. How long your life is not the most important thing. God gives us each a certain amount of breaths. You have a certain amount of breaths. And when those breaths, you have an allotted number. And when you have completed your allotted number, you die. Or you're born. Depends on how you're looking at it. Right? What's most important is not when you die. It's how you lived. What did your life mean? What did you stand for? What did you sacrifice for? Who did you love? What did you give? Not what you took. And there's a message of take, and take that's being played on the airwaves. But what brings happiness, what brings joy, what gives you energy, what makes you healthy, is giving. Giving of your gift. Because the greatest gift is love. And God, by creating us, has shown us his unconditional love. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves each and every one of us. Otherwise, he would not have created you. And this is what Satan, Iblis, could not understand. This is what the angels, even when God commanded them to prostrate and for the Inni ja'ilun fil ardi khalifa, I'm placing in the earth a viceroy. They couldn't understand. Why are you choosing this being made of clay and water, and you're telling us you're commanding us to prostrate to him, and you've made him your viceroy? What did he do? That's the whole point. He didn't do anything. You can't earn love. Can you imagine your parents telling you, love me? You can't command someone to love you. Love is something that comes freely. It's given freely and it comes freely. And as recipients of God's unconditional love, of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's unconditional mahabbah, we are to be givers of unconditional love. There's an Arab proverb, فَاقِدُ الشَّيْء لَا يُعْطِي. Someone who doesn't have something can't give it. And we're surrounded by Allah's love. We're surrounded. It's in here. It's out there. It's within you. In the next world, we face the judgment day. And that's a day, on the day of judgment, the animals and human beings and jinn are all assembled before God. And people's rights are returned to them. This is the place of justice and mercy. People who are arrogant, Prophet Muhammad tells us on that day, people who thought they were better than others, that spiritual quality of arrogance actually manifests physically as they will be smaller than everyone else. People who were stingy and refused to help those who were less well off than them, their wealth comes back to haunt them on that day. All of the actions, the physical actions, all the spiritual qualities that we have in this life, in the barzakh, in the intermediate realm, they are manifested as realities. Because they are actually more real than our physical being. And that day is an awesome day. It's an awesome day, and it's a day of beauty, and it's a day of absolute terror at the same time. And there are people who will be in repose and relaxation on that day. Because, and there's 7 groups. I'm sure you all have come across this, right? But one of these groups, and the easiest of these groups to belong to, is that those who love each other for the sake of God, for Allah, will be under his shade on the day of judgment. And then lastly, in paradise, you don't earn paradise. It's really important for us to understand. And sometimes people think because in Islam, practice is emphasized, prayer and fasting, that Muslims somehow think they get into paradise, into heaven, through their works. You don't get into paradise through your works. Even Prophet Muhammad said, no one, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, said, no one enters heaven except through the mercy of Allah. And his companions, his disciples said, even you? And he put his hand on his head and he said, إِلَّا أَن يَتَغَمَّدِنِي اللَّهُ بِرَحْمَتِهِ, except that God enveloped me in his mercy. So you don't get into paradise based on your works. It's by God's grace. And the greatest reward of paradise is seeing God, seeing Allah. It's not 72 virgins, that Sean Hannity keeps talking about. Right? It's not the 72 virgins. It's not palaces, right? It's not palaces. Inshallah, I'm wrapping up. It's not palaces. Heaven is not about real estate and women. It's not about real estate and women, right? Which is what some people think this life is about. It's not about real estate and satisfying your ego or your appetites. Heaven is about closeness to God. So if we understand what our final destination is, if we understand that our final destination and what God created us for is to be with Him, to be in proximity to Him forever, perhaps that will give us perspective on how we should be living our lives. Not as monks or nuns. The whole point is not that you become a monk or a nun or an imam or a sheikh, right? To live a spiritual, religious life. No. All that's needed is that you live a life of awareness of God, service to Him, and service to His creatures. One of my teachers taught me that a person who has the wrong idea about life will often have the wrong idea about death. Life is an opportunity, and death is an opportunity. Thank you so much. Assalamu alaikum.
So we'll have Q&A for a few minutes and then we'll pray Asr. So there's no card passed around. There's not that many writing utensils. So just look around and see if you can borrow someone else's writing utensil. Or you can just raise your hand and ask a question. That's more free. But if you prefer, you can write a question and then just pass it up. So, etc.
I would say that would be.
Okay.
You guys can both get on it, whatever.
There's no substitute for having a support network of people whose presence, not their words, right? Because it's really easy to put on a kufi and a jalabiya and look religious, right? But you want to surround yourself with people whose presence reminds you of heaven, reminds you of God, reminds you of Prophet Muhammad, reminds you of Jesus, reminds you of Moses and Abraham and Mary and Sarah. You want to surround yourself. You want to have a few people in your life who remind you of the best that you can be. And when you're in those situations, when the faith is shaken at the deepest part of who you are, you talk to those people, you get their advice, you pray with them, you let them know what you're going through. The second thing is to always ask God to give you the strength to endure whatever He sends your way. Allah says, "La yukallifullahu nafsan illa wus'aha." God does not put on a soul a burden it cannot bear. So the fact that He's given you a particular trial or test is a sign that you can bear it. You may not know you can, but you can. So, depending and relying on God and asking Him for strength, and always making sure you have people in your life who love you and who inspire you. Inshallah.
For myself personally, I have found, I think it's the mystic, St. John said, that some of us go through the dark night of the soul. And I have found that while I think I'm losing God, it's almost like, my mother used to teach swimming, and I think I've got this right, where when you're learning junior life saving, did anybody ever do that in swimming classes? Well, anyway, it's almost counterintuitive, because when somebody is drowning and you go to save them, what you actually do is you take them down to the bottom. And because if you try to save them up at the surface, they clutch at you and they drown you too. I think sometimes when we are losing our faith is we actually have the opportunity to get the closest to God. It feels like we're losing everything. And those are the moments where I think you almost have to say to God, I'm losing you. I don't feel you. I don't know you. I don't know where you are. I don't find it helps me very much by pretending that I'm not going through it. I've got to go down to the bottom. And again, to use, I would use Jesus, it was, he's on the cross and he says, where the heck are you, God? Why have you forsaken me? I mean, if Jesus could feel that at times, I think we can have a real relationship with God where we say, I am lost, I don't feel you, I don't know where you are. And then what you don't want to do is run. You want to pull in and be sure you're spending time in prayer, and you are very real, and you're saying, I'm losing that connection, and I don't know what to do. And be honest about it. I think the honesty, God respects that honesty and meets you halfway.
Okay, so there's another question. How does one talk to their parent who is pushing them to be an A when you want to be a Q? Pushing for a particular career thing when you want to have a different.
I think I may have a very different answer, and I know in Islamic culture the honor and reverence and respect for your parents is probably different than mine was. And I think there have been times when I have had to stand up and say, I'm a Q. But I know I know, talking with many of my Muslim friends, that is really really different in your culture. So this may be a better question for you. I have felt that sometimes, for example, my father did not want me to be a musician. Musicians who don't make any money, right? So I was in England. I was studying in a Bible college at the time in England. And he said, no, you're going to study the Bible, you're going to be a missionary. He didn't believe I could serve God and be a musician. I think I proved him wrong, but anyway, I felt very depressed, and a man saw me, one of the teachers from the school, and he saw me depressed, and he said, what's the matter? I said, oh, I have to go to the school, this is what my father wants me to do. And he said to me, come and have tea with me tomorrow afternoon. And I did, and he said, there are times when God will call you to do something different than your parents. It was an important point in my life where I had to stand up and do that. But I also understand culturally that's maybe I'm saying something that's completely impossible for you to do, and that honoring your parents and what they want you to do is something you need to do. So I will defer
Here on this question.
Bismillah, it may be because, I'm from the States, but I don't necessarily disagree with Miss Rebecca. I get this question a lot, actually. A lot of young people are conflicted over fulfilling their dreams and fulfilling their parents' wishes for them. And I think that there's two ways you can approach it. First of all, let me say this. Based on my reading of the Quran, based on my reading of the Hadith, honoring your parents, birrul walidain, wa bil walidaini ihsana, treating your parents beautifully, is not synonymous with obeying your parents' every command and whim. You can treat someone with honor and love and respect and not be their slave. And so I think maybe this is the balance we need to look for. I do think people should stand up and be cues. If that's what God is calling them to. But there's two parts to this. Number one, you need to seek to be in touch with yourself enough to know that you're really being called to, that you're a cue.
You really are.
And some people I've met, they'll be an A first, right? So, for example, they may go to medical school. Like I met a gentleman. I was just in Singapore. His name's Ibrahim. He owns a bookstore called Warda Books. Amazing bookstore. One of the greatest bookstores I've ever been to. It's not very big, but there's just so much going on there. It's medical doctor. Right? He went to medical school, graduated, he was practicing. But what he really wanted to do was own a bookstore. You can imagine his mother and father had heart attacks, right? When he stopped practicing. But that's what he did, and he's happy. And you know what? His parents are happy. They weren't happy initially, but now, a few years later, they are. So sometimes you have to show through your own strength, that being true to who you are is what's best. Yes. Be yourself. But sometimes you may have to you might have to fulfill their wishes if it's going to really cause disruption in the home, and especially if they'll pay for it. You don't want to go into debt because of someone's whim. So.
Yeah, Dan, anyone else ask questions? Like, you just ask me to.
My question I want to direct to Dr. Rebecca because I'm currently studying to be an acupuncturist, and I'm curious as to how you exactly go about helping youths, or for that matter, any person of any age, dealing with death. Because I feel like, how can you deal with death except with, spiritual anecdotes? Like, I believe it's like a spiritual question. How can you do that without being dogmatic, Because I don't know, how are you going to help someone without bringing up spirituality?
Oh, I do. Well,
what I don't do is bring up dogma.
Okay. Which is like, for example.
For example, first of all, what I try to find out is, sometimes I think death is a little bit like crossing rapids, and or even life is like crossing rapids, and I know what my rope is. I know how I get across it, but I don't know their rope, but I truly believe God loves everyone, even when I meet people that are just not easy to love. And my girls, I have two daughters who, I would come home sometimes and just say, this person is so hard to get along with. And inevitably, one of my daughters would put, God loves Aaron too, Mom, and they put it on my bedroom door, so every time I opened it, I had to see it. And it was a good thing that they did that, because I'm not responsible for, God loves that person and has probably been communicating with that person in some way. Let me give you a crazy example. One of our boys that was dying, his mother was a very big, strong Christian in her belief system and everything. He was not all about it. And he was dying, and he didn't like her shoving this down his throat. So I got to know Chris, and where do you go when you're conflicted in your soul? Where is your soul? What's your rope? What is it? And for him, it was Dave Matthews Band's music. Now that may sound a little strange, you know, but I actually am a Dave Matthews fan, so I knew a lot of the music. I went into his text, into his lyrics, and I created his own Bible for him out of Dave Matthews' lyrics, you know. How are we going to get through this life? It was how God communicated to him. And if you listen hard enough to a person, you find out what has been the way God's been noodling with them here, you know?
Yes.
And it may not be my way, and it may be really different than I've been accustomed. I would say it's my calling, it's what I'm good at, getting to know a young person and hear, oh, God's been talking to you through that. Like, God speaks to me through nature. I could probably drag Sohei about to my property and he would go, I don't get it, I don't see it, I don't know. But I don't think it's always the same way, but I am absolutely convinced that God is working with every human being in some way. So if I am not arrogant enough or dogmatic enough to say, this is the way you have to grab my rope and this is how you will get through death, if I listen and I have the humility to hear, that's where the Spirit is working with you, I can find and help him cultivate that and help him find his rope to get through this. And it's a little unorthodox, which is probably why I'm not an ordained Christian minister, because, you know, I couldn't pass the dogma test. I just am convinced that God is working with us in all kinds of different ways. So I don't know if that answers your question. That's what I look for. Try to find how God's been working with them.
That helps me a lot. Could you mention, like, for that example, like, what in the lyrics, like, you know,
Well,
for example?
any Dave Matthews fans here?
No.
Okay. Well, then these lyrics aren't going to mean anything to you, but, you know, he talks about, what's the use in worrying, what's the use in hurry? Whenever he can't get perspective, he looks at the sky. And the vastness of the sky, I don't know if you know, but his sister was murdered when he was a young boy. And so he was confronted with death really early on. So you get into his lyrics and there are all these questions. Now, they're not necessarily always answers, except there's this spirituality he keeps looking for. There's a song, if any of you want to look it up just to see what I'm talking about, there's a song he wrote called Pig. And this blessed sip of life, is it not enough? Is it not enough, this blessed sip of life? And he talks about what more is there? What is it that I can pull from life, especially someone who's facing death? So what I did was ask my team, my Streetlight team, and I had maybe 8 or 9 people that were Dave Matthews fans. I said, give me lyrics that you think are spiritual. Throw me some, and they started sending me emails, and I thought I knew a lot of his songs, but they came up with wonderful suggestions. And then what I did was I took the lyrics. One of them was, on this starry night, laying down here, I feel as small as dust looking up. What's the, you know, and it was perspective. And so then I found a picture of stars on a starry night, and I put those words there. And for this boy, Chris, it was as spiritually helpful and enlightening as opening up the Bible to him. In fact, it was more so, because for the Bible, he saw his mother, he saw his father, he saw church services and things that he couldn't connect with God that way. But he was doing it through this music. And yeah, it took time. I went through a lot of lyrics and I just pulled things out that would provoke him to reach out to something greater than he knew. And he knew there wasn't one of those lyrics he didn't smile and go, I know that song. Yes, I know that. Oh, I love that line there. Because that's how God had been speaking to him through this music. Now, sometimes it's a little more challenging when I meet somebody who's into some crazy rap music. You know, I have to work really hard. But a lot of our rap artists grew up in the church, and so, you know, I mean, I have to look harder, but even Kanye West, you know, I'll find it. Or maybe that's just music they like, but it's not, you know, I'm sorry to take this question a little bit longer, but one of the things I used to do with my young people, I'm sorry, women, I'm not looking over at you. It's the way the chairs are, I think so. I used to have somebody, he would come out with a t-shirt, and he'd have yellow post-it notes all over himself. He'd be standing there with like just a shirt on, and I said, okay, you've grown up in his case, he'd grown up in the church. He said, okay, you know, Jesus died for your sins, he rose from the grave, you have all these things you learn in Sunday school. You've got all your little post-it notes that your parents have put on you, or your church has put on you, or your grandmother's put on you, and there are all these things. And each one, you know, I just pulled them off. They came off so easily. They were not attached to him. They were simply things he had been taught and heard. But there was this one post-it note that I had it planned. I actually found a little yellow piece of material and I sewed it into his shirt. I mean, this was all staged, you know. So I went to pull that off and it didn't come off. And I said, Mike, what is that? He said, that was that night when I was at summer camp and we were sleeping under the stars, and I looked out and I said, wow, there's got to be more to life than this. That was attached to him. Now, it wasn't dogmatically really deep. It didn't tell him all about the love of God or anything, but it was a starting point. It was something that wouldn't come off. And so I try to find that when I work with young people, what is it that doesn't come off? What is it that at the very core of your being, yes, you got attached a lot of post-it notes, and we all do if we've grown up in a faith tradition. You know, we've got it, it's all been put on us. And like I say, you're the first good wind in college, it blows all off you, you know? You know, you're not, I don't know, and that's what I was told, but I don't know if I really think that. I'm sitting in science class or I'm sitting in anthropology and I don't know anymore. What doesn't come off? What is you? What will not leave you? Build from that, work with that, and you just say when you pray, this is what I know, this is what I believe. Can we work with that? Can we move from that? And that's what I do with the patients and the young people that I'm working with.